Hello, welcome to this training video from Progressive Christians Uniting on our Climate Change and Faith small group study guide resource. My name is Timothy Murphy. I am the Executive Director of Progressive Christians Uniting and one of the co-creators of this resource. And with me is another of the co-creators.
Hi, my name's Jill Craven, and I am an engineer. I am from the United Church of Christ. I'm a member at the Bethel United Church of Christ in Beaverton, Oregon. And when I created this curriculum with Tim, I was a member of the Aspire First Congregational Church in Pasadena, California. My background is in atmospheric chemistry and chemical engineering, and I was interested in what faith and climate change had in common, which is why Tim and I got together and created this curriculum.
Thanks, Jill. You might be wondering kind of the purpose of this resource in case you haven't looked at it online. There's resources online that we're going to go through, but the goal here is to help groups better understand climate change, to connect it with their faith, and to learn how to act both personally and collectively to respond to climate disruption and to act in that way. And so that's why we're offering this training. We hope that it helps you lead a session, which will then help a group enact responding to climate change as an act of faith. So I'm going to just go through an outline of this training. We're going to do an introduction to materials, all of which are online, and you're going to be able to see during this training. The format of sessions, how they look, the role of a facilitator. We're going to model part of a session, what that's like, how presenting material works, and the way we think is best to approach it. And then finally, how to recruit people to your group. So by the end of this training, you should feel confident that you can lead a group, ideally with another person. But Jill will take us through a bit of the materials.
Thanks, Tim. So for the materials, in order to get the materials, they're downloadable from a website, progressivechristiansuniting.org. If you type that into the Google search, this webpage will come up. And if you scroll down to a section called the PCU's 8th Day Project and click on the link that's there, it will lead you to Faith and Climate Change. And there's a description of the group and a description of the curriculum and listing the 6 sessions that are included and the format. And right down here, you can see that there's a section called Downloadable Materials. So we have the actual curriculum, which is what everyone in your group would get a copy of. Something called the Facilitator's Guide, which we're going to go over a little bit in a little while. Something called Additional Resources, because when we were coming up with all this material, we found a lot of great websites and articles and movies, too much for the time of a 90-minute session. So we have lots of information here. And then Holy Manners, which is something to help guide you when you're leading these small groups. So if you click on the curriculum link, you can see that it downloads a PDF file, which you can put onto your computer and print out if you like. And you can scroll down and you see the Climate Change and Faith Eco-Ministry Team's title page. And the very first page shows so there's 6 sessions in this curriculum. The first one being Introduction and Creation. The second one being Facts and History of Climate Change. The third one being Consumerism. 4th is Living Within Limits. 5 is Uneven Effects of Climate Change. And the 6th and final session is a Faithful Action and Conclusion. So we encourage you to download these materials and read through them, and then even perhaps redo this training if you didn't have them downloaded before watching.
Great. So in the sessions. Each session lasts 90 minutes. And there is typically a check-in at the beginning, checking in how people are doing, so that we're not just learning information, we're building community as a small group. And so there's suggestions of how that can be done. Typically a minute or less, a little longer in the first session of like a high and low, a joy or concern, however that works in your community, so that we're learning about each other. There's a scripture in each session. There's different videos and engagement. Ones we have that we say definitely use this, and others in the additional resources, or ones that even are on there that are options depending on time. And then reflection on actions. Each session has some sort of action activity at the end of it, inviting people to do in between sessions, so that when you come back, the first thing you do is you share about reflecting on what was it like doing that action. And there are simple things from looking at your carbon footprint to making a phone call to a legislator, to other types of things. And some of the actions involve more advocacy, and that depends on the current situation in your state, in your community. And so it helps to look online or to reach out to PCU about suggestions if you're not sure what's going on in your community. We recommend that you do a little advanced preparation before sessions. It's always good just to look at it, but it almost never takes more than an hour beforehand. And there's the facilitator guide to help you walk through and at least look at that, so you kind of know the order of how things are going to go. But Jill's going to talk a little bit more about the role of being a facilitator.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So if you go back to that progressivechristianuniting.org downloadable materials website, and you click on there's something called a facilitator's guide, which will help you understand the role of a facilitator. So just so you guys know, this was actually the first small group that I facilitated. So if it's something you've never done before but you're interested in, no need to fear. We encourage you to do it, and we provided resources for if you've never been a facilitator before, or if you need to brush up on what's needed for being a facilitator. So at the very front of the facilitator guide resources is the section called Facilitator Guidelines for the ECO Ministry Team on Climate Change and Faith. And it goes through and discusses a little bit of the format, and then it goes through some details for preparing for each of the sessions. And then it also gives you tips for effective facilitation of small groups. So this is really helpful, especially if you haven't been a facilitator before, like I had been. And then also, then it goes into each session. So this is just for the facilitators, and it's something you would want to print out and have with you for each of the sessions. Just you and a co-facilitator, perhaps, and not the individual participants, because it goes through. It's like a guideline, so it tells you what to do for each session, reminding you, and we've put little time suggestions so that you can stay on track. And that being said, you can also monitor the community. So if you end up having a big discussion at the beginning, you can, modify things at the end, for example. So, Tim, have you ever been a facilitator before, and what was it like facilitating?
I have done some facilitation before. I didn't mention it, but I'm also a minister. But that you don't have to be a minister, obviously, to lead a small group. It just means that I've done small group type of leadership before. So for me, what's really important is that when you're a facilitator, you're not the expert. I mean, you might know certain things that others have, but it's not about lecturing people or telling them, oh, there's this and this and this, you need to know all these things. It's about inviting them to think together for themselves and together around the materials, around the issues, because if people are just being talked at, then I don't think they learn much, and it's not very fun to attend the session. People might go, but it's much better for people to engage, to invite them to share their own experience and how it connects with their life. And so doing that, I think makes for good facilitation, and I think that makes for good learning. And so that's why I really like this type of small group style of facilitation. And not everyone has experience with it, but if you're able to listen to others and not immediately correct them whenever you hear something that you don't necessarily agree with, because your job as a facilitator is not to constantly correct people, then I think you can do a good job facilitating. I know, Jill, that when you led this first time with me, when we were co-creating this, that you had never been a facilitator before, and you have gone on since to facilitate other sessions. Tell me, what was it like doing that for the first time and then going forward now that you've had more experience?
Yeah, so for me, I was quite nervous about being a facilitator for a small group in general, but especially at a church, since I don't consider myself having a strong background in scripture or any material regarding faith. I've been going to church my whole life, and I like the community aspect, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert. But as Tim had mentioned, that's not your job or your role as a facilitator. I was really interested in these two subjects and how they mixed, and I wanted to talk to people about it. So I had the motivation, but I didn't think I had the skills, so I was pretty nervous. But what helped was working with a partner, with Tim, and that helped me gain my confidence, which is why we recommend people working in pairs. And so I found the first experience quite satisfying, and I felt a lot more connected to my faith community. It's a more intimate environment, and if you can manage airtime, we call getting everybody to talk. You might be surprised what you can learn about somebody that you sit next to at church on Sunday every day. After social hour, you might learn something about them, but in a small group where you're talking about these very specific subjects, you might have a more intimate connection with people. So I found it really satisfying part of my faith development. And then I liked it so much that when I moved churches, I decided to lead it on my own. I asked the minister to participate with me, and he did. He originally wasn't going to, but he liked it so much he decided to. And but I felt confident enough to lead on my own. And then since then, I've also led small groups that are at university on different subjects, and it's a really fun, satisfying activity that I've found.
Nice. I'm glad that you had that experience and it was so positive that now you're leading, you're the lead of a pair. That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
What we're going to do is look at something we call Holy Manners. That's one of the resources that Jill mentioned, and it's available. You can look at it as we're doing it here. And so Holy Manners is kind of a way of preparing groups to be better listeners, and it will make your job easier as a facilitator. So its purpose is to help a group for listening and respecting each other and setting those guidelines early on. This actually is something that you will have the group look at on the first session. And so it's here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I think it's important to kind of go through some of these big points that will help you when setting the tone for your group, because if people understand the expectations, then it makes it your job easier. You don't have to stop the flow of conversation. And so some of those points are that we first and foremost acknowledge that we come together as brothers and sisters, each made in the image of the divine, that it's not just about us and is on our own here, and that there's a larger presence that's kind of guiding this conversation and our time together. That confidentiality is really important. What stays in the group, what's in a group stays in a group unless there's agreement, so that we're not gossiping about each other. If people can feel safe to share and to disagree, that we respect one another, that we don't have to correct what people say, that we listen without interrupting or avoiding sarcasm and hurtful comments to people, that we really try to truly listen. That sometimes it's hard to do without already trying to figure out how you're going to respond, that we're not about getting into a discussion or fixing people or giving advice or judging, simply to hear what people are saying. So people hear that, they're more willing to share. And people are probably going to be in different places. And if you don't know where they're at, then it's going to be hard to grow. That the importance is more about being in a relationship rather than proving that one person is right or winning an argument. This is a really important one, that destructive behavior is not acceptable at all. When that's letting people know that up front when it's discovered, that we're going to bring awareness to that behavior and find ways to help people change that and support them as appropriate, and acknowledging that someone who won't stop disrupting the group or not honoring these expectations might be asked with grace to leave the group, that is something that may be necessary, depending on what the needs are for your group. And then lastly, to commit to really attending and showing up, not just being present, but emotionally and spiritually present. It's hard sometimes when we're busy or stressed, but to be there fully will make sessions more worthwhile for everyone. And so we ask people to, you to go through that in the first session to remind people about it as necessary. You may not want to read the whole thing a second time, but if you might want to highlight a certain point if you're noticing, hey, this point maybe is not happening as well. So rather than calling people out immediately, depending on what makes the most sense, it can be helpful just to remind people, oh yes, this is what we agreed to. This is what it means to be part of this group. And again, that will make your job easier as a facilitator. So that's Holy Manners. Jill.
I also want to say that if you open with the discussion of Holy Manners, that sets the tone for the rest of the sessions. So you can go back and refer to it if you need to, but in the 2 experiences I've had with this, once you state it, it's there. That just sets the tone for the remainder of the session. So next, the next part of this training, I'm going to be modeling a session. So if you have your facilitator guideline and or curriculum printed out, you can follow along. We're going to be looking at the session number 2, Facts and History of Climate Change. And what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be modeling what a facilitator would say, and Tim is going to be modeling what a participant would say, just so you guys can see how it works.
And one thing to add is that we're doing this session in part because this is probably the most difficult material to go through, because it's the most technical, the most sciencey. And so seeing this one, if you're comfortable with this one, everything else is easier than this one. So we went ahead and said, here's the hardest one. So from there on, it should be easier. Is that fair, Jill?
Yep. Yeah. This is the most. This will contain the most technical information, and then the rest of the sessions are don't contain as much technical information. So if you have the facilitator guideline open, you'll see that in session 2, the first thing is opening. So you would just welcome people. You either have snacks or you don't. You can start out with a prayer, perhaps. And then have people introduce themselves again or put on name tags. Then we do a check-in after the welcome. So here I would say, invite people to say their names again and to offer up a blessing and a challenge from their week, and give everybody about 30 to 60 seconds. So I could model that in the beginning, and then everybody would go around in a circle and follow suit. And then the next thing that we would do is we would reflect on the previous session's actions. So everybody will have been assigned an action, And this is a really great time for people to share, what they learned either about themselves through that action or what they learned about that action. So each session has a different action item. And then we would introduce the theme. So here's where I'm going to switch into facilitator mode. So today, we are going to be talking about facts and history of climate change. And a discussion on the facts and history of climate change would not be complete without talking about carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide has been used as an alternative for global temperature since carbon dioxide and temperature are directly proportional. So that means when one goes up, the other one goes up. When one goes down, the other one goes down. But they often don't go up and down at the same time. There can be some kind of lag. So a common metaphor that's used to describe this is saying that CO2 is like the thermostat for our atmosphere. So, for example, if you're going to bake cookies, you set the oven to 350 degrees and you set that temperature. The oven doesn't instantaneously reach 350 degrees. It takes some time. So similar, if you set CO2 to 400 parts per million, for example, then it's not like the temperature of the Earth is going to instantaneously go up right when that carbon dioxide concentration goes up, but there will be some lag time when the temperature goes up. So when you think about the relationship between these two, think about that thermostat metaphor. So if we have the lag in temperature increase with increasing carbon dioxide, that means that we shouldn't just be cutting emissions right now, but trying to actively remove them. So one of the things that we're going to do now to try to help us understand carbon dioxide more is to look at the graphs that are in your curriculum. So now I am going to screen share, and you guys, as facilitators, would just invite, you can either print them out or have it on your computer. So I'm going to invite everybody to look at the first graph that's in session 2, titled the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii Monthly Average Carbon Dioxide Concentration. So I just want to open it up for discussion and observation. What do people notice about this graph of carbon dioxide?
Well, I see that it's going up each year. I see that it's in Hawaii, which is kind of strange. I see that it kind of goes up and down. It's like a jagged sawtooth. And it looks like what's going up on the right is years, and on the left is the carbon dioxide concentration. And ppm, I don't know what that means, but ppm, something.
Yeah, so ppm means parts per million, and all it means is just a unit that scientists use to communicate what the concentration of carbon dioxide is. And that means for every million air parts or air molecules, you would have 1 of carbon dioxide. And Tim, you mentioned that there was this increase of carbon dioxide going up, but that there was a little pattern in the upward trend going up and down. And do you have any idea why there might be a jagged pattern in carbon dioxide? What do you think that could be coming from?
Maybe, I guess maybe it's something about the seasons, maybe. I'm not sure why the seasons would do that, but it looks like it's going annually, so maybe it's a seasonal thing.
Yeah, so if you zoomed in on the graph to 1 year, you'd see that it would go up and down in 1 year. So, and that's related to carbon dioxide and trees. And so it's very related to seasons. So in the northern hemisphere, trees breathe in carbon dioxide each season. During the winter the carbon dioxide is higher because trees are breathing it in less, whereas in the summer it's lower since trees are breathing the carbon dioxide in more. The other thing you noticed was that it's in Hawaii. Why do you think we would want to make measurements out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean?
Well, I mean, I live in Los Angeles, and so there's a lot of air pollution here, and I imagine if you measured it here, it might be affected by the air in the neighborhood. But maybe Hawaii, because it's in the middle of the ocean, is, I don't know, more isolated, so it's not going to be impacted by local variations, I guess.
Yeah, that's right on. So the Mauna Loa station is called a background station, and it's because it's ideal for measuring the background concentration of gases in the atmosphere. So you're not going to get these little local perturbations like a car driving by or even a city because this particular station is at a high altitude and it's out in the middle of the ocean. So when you get a measurement here, you're what's called the background concentration of dioxide.
The background concentration?
Yeah. So let's measure, or let's move to the next graph, which is showing historical carbon dioxide measurements. What do you guys, or what do you, Tim, observe about this graph?
Well, this one seems like it's taking place over a lot longer of a time. The last one was, like, the last 50 years. This one seems like it says thousands of years ago. So we're looking at a lot longer of a time. That's for sure.
Yeah. And any idea on how they might get these measurements?
It says ice core data. Mm-hmm. I don't know what an ice core is. What is that?
Scientists drill ice cores, and they basically take a big machine and they go to a spot on the Earth, either Greenland or Antarctica, and they can recover information about ancient atmospheres by analyzing the composition of little tiny gas bubbles in the ice. And actually, there's a movie that's shown in section 6 of our facilitator guide, actually. So there's an optional movie we could watch put out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And it shows the physical science basis for climate change and how scientists measure it. So if you're interested more, you can watch that. But this graph emphasizes how the rate of increase in CO2, so the change of CO2 over time, goes up and down over the past 800,000 years. But if you look,
people often say, well, carbon's gone up, temperature's gone up and down. It varies. What's the big deal about now?
What is the big deal about now? I'll give the question right back at you. What do you notice about now compared to the last 800,000 years?
I mean, it varies here and there. You see, it's going up and down. Kind of stays under 300. It looks like, for the most part. Not much ever below 200. Not much above 300. Since the last 2,000 years, it's kind of gone up a lot, like a straight line.
Yeah. The rate, not only has the rate of change increased, so how much the CO2 has changed over each year has gone up, but the absolute value has also gone up. So you'll notice that big arrow pointing to present value is almost at 400 parts per million. So the first graph we looked at like modern day carbon dioxide. This graph is looking at historical carbon dioxide. And now we're going to look at a third and final graph showing futuristic carbon dioxide. So what do you happen to notice about this graph?
Well, again, it's a timeline looking to the future. It's about how much warming is going to be. On the left, it says. And so then it's got these different lines giving, I guess, different options of how much warming is going to be in the future. And it looks like there's some variations, like high growth, moderate growth, low growth, and constant, seems like.
Yeah, so what do you notice about the constant CO2? So what this means is if we just emitted CO2, if the CO2 we emitted today didn't change, didn't go up, didn't go down, we just continue to emit the same amount of CO2. And what do you notice about how that temperature changes, even with constant CO2? What is that line doing, the yellow line?
So constant CO2, I guess, is if we just shut down everything tomorrow, like no more industrial emission whatsoever, I guess. That's what we're saying for constant CO2?
We're saying if we kept the same emissions as today and we didn't increase them at all. We just didn't decrease or increase, just same emissions.
Oh, temperature still looks like it still goes up a bit.
Yeah. So that's like what we were talking about in the beginning with that metaphor. So if we set the temperature of the oven to 350, the oven will continue to rise. So today, if we set our emissions to 400 ppm of carbon dioxide, that temperature will increase. And it looks like from this graph, it starts to level off in about 100 years. But that CO2 will continue to rise. Even if we keep the temperature constant, or the
CO2 constant.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other question I wanted to ask is, why do you think there's so much variation in those models? What do you think the sources of variation would come from?
Oh, that's like the lightly colored stuff by the darker, bolder lines.
Yeah, so there's that. There's the shading behind the line. And then there's also like 3 different scenarios. So
okay. I guess whether we reduce carbon emissions, or if we're saying, hey, let's all just build 10,000 new coal refineries, so that carbon goes up fast.
Yeah, so there are many different types of uncertainties that go into this model, and the 2 main ones that are good to highlight is the scientific uncertainty, which can be related to how what scientists know and how it affects the Earth system. But then there's another bigger source of uncertainty called the socioeconomic uncertainty, which is related to energy production, how countries regulate emissions, natural disasters that might wipe out cities or populations. So these kinds of things we don't have a good handle on, and could potentially be a big source of uncertainty in these models. So that's why there's so many different model scenarios, and also within each scenario there's a variability.
Nice.
So that's the end of our graph discussion. And yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on something about the method of how that was presented. So viewers may notice that Jill didn't launch into a description of she didn't like give the chart and then start explaining it. She asked me, hey, what do you notice? And that's exactly what a facilitator should do. What do you notice? What do people see? And then what people comment on, you can go into that and explain that piece, so that it's being led by their questions versus the knowledge or understanding. So if people notice the sawtooth, focus on that. If they notice it's going up, focus on that. If they notice in the middle, in the historical and the ice cores, talk about the ice cores. So you don't just start explaining everything with a bunch of information. You invite their curiosity, so they're like, what's going on here? Explain what I think I know what's going on. I think I get this. And if they're right, affirm it. And if they've misinterpreted something, say, actually, what this means is this thing.
And the same technique is used not just for the information that was presented in this session, but all the sessions, and also not just on the maybe technical part of the session, but also for scripture. So same thing with scripture. If you have a background in scripture as a facilitator and you open the scripture, you can prepare your own interpretation of it to perhaps guide the facilitation. But what you really want to do is ask people, what did you think about it? And so actually Tim is going to be talking more about that next.
Great, thanks, Jill. So let me bring up the scripture. So each session has a scripture, and this is the scripture from session 2. So this is Isaiah 24, 4-6. So it would be read out loud. Ideally, I like it to be read by someone else, so not just a facilitator, so people aren't just, again, hearing from facilitators, so you can have multiple people read a verse. And then we found it very helpful to break into pairs to get impressions and invite them to share together with each other. And so that way there is there's the conversation between people. So a lot of people don't like to share as a whole group. So let people kind of see what they observe, and then invite them when they come back together to see the observation. So again, it's not about lecturing, but inviting people to see what they kind of saw. And so in the facilitator guidelines, you can see that here. We have, invitation to for the discussion, and we have some questions, some bullet points that you can use. And we find this helpful for explaining things if people have certain questions in kind of overall themes that we think are important, but you don't start with those themes. You don't start with those bullet points saying, here's a scripture, and now let me tell you what it means. Just like the charts, it's about inviting people to notice things, observe things. Depending on your setting, if you're in a liberal Protestant church, someone might want to talk about the historical context and so forth, and that isn't, and you might have to kind of guide the discussion back towards the themes that we're looking at, because we're not focusing so much on what was Isaiah's original intent. Did Isaiah really mean about climate change? Probably not, but that's not really relevant. What's relevant is in the scripture, which you can see again, that there seems to be patterns and of health for the planet, and when certain things happen, it's like a warning of what can happen if we get out of balance. And so it's kind of foreshadowing of saying, watch out, you need to pay attention to this, there's consequences. So that's kind of how we interact with scripture. So you don't have to be an expert. It's helpful to look at the bullet points and if you have your own observations, but again, to draw out people's thoughts, starting in small groups and then inviting people to share as a large group. Jill, how have you found this to work when you've led a session most recently?
So I have found that it's really helpful when you're reading the scripture to pair it into groups, because the people who maybe are shy or more introverted and maybe not as comfortable sharing with the other activities, they can interact one-on-one with somebody rather than the whole group. And even if they don't share with the whole group afterwards, they're sharing what they feel and how they can interpret this message. So they still get something, they still get heard, and it's a good way for people who are introverted to interact with the material. The other thing that I really like about the scripture section is the diversity of responses you can get, because some people in the group have a strong background in knowledge, and then other people don't or haven't read the Bible completely or something. And so the diversity of responses and what people might tease out of a scripture, its meaning, really helps you understand a little bit about them, actually. So for a small group, it's nice to come together in that way.
Cool. Do you want to share a little bit about how to get people to groups?
Yes. So next we're going to talk about what is one way you could, or many ways you can get people to come to your small group. So I found one of the best ways is to ask people, so I'm interested in participating in this group that I'm leading. Another great idea is you can ask your pastor or minister if it would be possible to have a themed sermon around stewardship or care of the earth, and to announce a small group in that setting. So for example, at the church I go to in Beaverton, we arranged our small groups session to be finishing the week before Earth Day in April. And so we had planned to basically finish, and then some of the group gave testimonies about what they had learned and what the two subjects meant to them, and also to try to get people excited in our congregation to take further action as a congregation around stewardship of the earth. The other thing you can do is you can start off well excited about this topic and then send around the sign-up sheet. That worked really well at the together for more than one setting. So it could be to more than one church. You could invite your neighbors or friends that don't go to church. I've found that inviting people to a small group is a lot less intimidating than saying, hey, do you want to come to church with me on Sunday? So one example of this is I had friends in Pasadena who had climate change backgrounds and some without, and I just told them, look, I'm hosting this small group in my house. Would you like to come? And about half of the group that participated weren't active churchgoers. So it was a really fun, diverse group. So we designed the curriculum so that it doesn't address one specific faith, so that you can bring people of different faiths together and have a conversation about these two topics, no matter what faith background you have.
Right. It's definitely has significant spiritual content to it, and the scriptures tend to come from the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament, but they don't presuppose faith commitments from persons who participate. And I know that a number of people who are more secular really enjoyed it and found it to be kind of a life-giving thing. So I think that's a wonderful way to kind of connect that faith is not just about personal being by yourself with God, but about how we connect with others and how we care for the world. Those are faith-related issues, and so I think it's fun, and it's for a lot of people. If people are science inclined, faith inclined, justice inclined, it fits on multiple levels. And those, Jill, any other ideas, or those are the main things?
Yep, those are the main things. Yep.
Okay, nice. Well, I'd say that one of the hopes I have for these groups is that that persons feel motivated to act, that they know they can act to care for our planet, that they can support each other, and that ideally they would also get connected with other climate groups in their area, maybe a 350.org group, or an environmental justice group, or some other type of group as faith allies, saying, hey, we're here, we care about this, it's important to us, and we want to be supportive there, and working in those local settings to stop climate change and the practices that make climate change worse for our whole planet, and also for quality of life in those areas. What about you, Jill?
Yeah, so I have a similar hope. So personally, first, these two subjects in this curriculum and leading this small group has helped me explore my combined faith and scientific identity, which I believe is a challenge for a lot of people of faith or a lot of people with scientific identity. So to be able to combine these two topics has been wonderful. It is my hope that people can use this resource to learn about climate change and also to engage their faith communities in not only discussion, but also to take action towards effective solutions to fight climate change.
Absolutely. The action part is really important. That's the way the sessions are designed, so that there's action items between sessions so that you're reflecting on that together. So it's not about let's talk, and then, oh, what do you want to do? That there is some practice of activity even during the series going through it, so that once it's over, people are hopefully fired up and want to take action as a small group, as a congregation, or as partners with other climate activism on policy items or those types of pieces. And so I really think that it's a good curriculum for that. I hope that you end up using it and find it to be exciting and useful and life-giving. And we want to thank you for taking the time to review this video, and hopefully at this point you feel like, yeah, I need to look at the materials, but I feel pretty confident. And as Jill said, feel free to look at the materials online, and if you're not comfortable still, you can review parts of this video so that you can have a better sense of how that goes. So I want to thank everyone who tuned in. Jill?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add one more thing. Both Tim and I have contact information at the beginning section of the facilitator guideline. So if you watch this and have some additional questions, feel free to reach out to either of us after viewing this and or while you're leading your small group.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, and good luck in leading a small group on climate change and faith for the sake of our world and the future of creation and our planet. Take care.